Hey, this is Passy from Passy's World of ICT, the guy with the white hat from Argentina. And, not me, just the hat. Welcome to our next lesson. This is about transferring data between forms, but we're not actually transferring, we're just going to share the data between some different forms, and you do that by using full name referencing. So we'll just show you quickly how you can do that, and then after that we're going to show you how we can apply that to use it for something useful, enhancing a program which you've already done before. So let's get into it. So if two forms are in the same project and we want to access some data on one form and put it onto the other form, you can do it with full name referencing. So we've got this form here, form 1, and we've just got a text box on it there, the name, Juanita Santa Maria. And we've also got some program code behind that form which just sets a public variable str great name. So it has to be public so it can be shared across different forms. And we've just set string great name to be equal to Paul Passy. And then when we click the go button, it opens up the other form, form number 2. And you can see we've managed to get the Juanita Santa Maria from form 1 onto form 2. And also that program variable, which was inside the program behind form 1, we've also managed to pull that across and have it on form 2, but we didn't actually transfer it across. All we did was from form 2, we could read back into this one and see what it was and then show it on the form. Okay, so, excuse me, we've done both of those things. So look, that's the basis of how you do it. And if that's all you needed to know, well, the lesson's pretty much done. But we're going to do more than that. What we're going to do is we're going to show you the program code first. So on the first form here, we've got some program code where we've set that public variable and we're just setting it equal to Paul Passy. That's the code behind that form. And this is just a text box in here, I think called txt name. And then what happens with the second form is we say that that label we want to show up, where we showed up Juanita Santa Maria there on form 2, we just refer back to form 1 using the full name. So the full name of textname.txt on here is actually form1.txt name. So if we refer to the full name in that form, in that project, it can go and get that data and access it, and we can put it onto form 2. And the same with the variable, we just prefix it with the name of the form where that variable is. And this explains why in two different forms you can have the exact same variable name, because our students were a little bit confused on that. And they said, what, you mean we can use the same name for the text box in both forms? How is VB going to know which one's which? Well, VB knows because it's actually using the full name. So, you know, the text box in 1 will be form1.txt name. And if you put another text box onto form 2 and call it txt name, VB will know it's actually form2.txt name. Okay, so this is kind of full name referencing. That's how all that works. So that's pretty much it for taking data from one form and being able to look at it or process it on another form. But what we're going to do is we're going to apply this, what we've just learned here, into making something to add on to the previous doctor appointments lesson. So that was the sort, filter and search lesson. And what was happening there was we had all these doctor appointments and we could do one of the functions, which was working out the unpaid bills. So we'd look for people that hadn't got their bill ticked off as paid, and we could list them down here. And what we're going to do with this taking data to different forms is people on that form, like Brainiac here for Tiana, this appointment's highlighted at the moment. We're going to take all that data from there. We're going to format it all up and put it in a new pop-up form, the email form. So we're going to take that data across here and add all these other things so that that's now a formatted email. And we could take the subject and copy it and paste it into our Outlook or our Gmail. We could get the address and copy and paste it in from here, because you can just drag your mouse across there and get all that, and then get this contents and paste that in, then send the email. So that would enable us to work out who hasn't paid and to send them out overdue notices. So that's what we're going to do in the rest of this lesson. And we're also going to review quite a few things as well. So in this lesson, we'll show you how to do all of the following. So pass data from one form to another form. Well, we've basically done that with the Juanita Santa Maria, so that's already done. Now we're going to review how in the data grid view we could select out the data from that current row for someone who hasn't paid their bill. And so we're revisiting that doctor appointments lesson, and we're going to create that unpaid bill email text, which we can use to send them out reminders, notices. And we're going to display that text. First, we'll just do get some data and put it in a message box, right? And then after that, we're actually going to make the pop-up form and get the data properly into the form, okay? So we're going to also need to do some XML file search because it'll turn out that we don't have the email address for the person. So we're going to have to look in another file of patient contact information and get that email. So we're going to review doing XML file searches by having a file that's got namespaces involved with it, making a node list, and then we can search through the node list. And so we're going to have to create that separate XML file that does have a namespace in it. And we're also going to look at the end why we had a little design flaw in the doctor appointments process and how you could easily fix that to make sure you got a unique identifier for each patient in case two patients have the same name. So yeah, this is going to be a long video and we kind of talk slow at some of the times, so we suggest you use the tools cog on the YouTube there and set it to maybe a speed of 1.5x or 1.75x just so it won't take so long to get through it. All right, so first thing we need to do for making this unpaid bill email text is directly on that old project. So you need to load up that old project or a similar project that you might have. And under unpaid bills, we're just going to copy paste that button and make another one called unpaid email. And that's going to be called BTN unpaid email is going to be the name of that button. So just one little change to that form from the previous lesson that you've got there, because you've done the previous lesson, because you are doing our lessons in order in the course like we told you to. So hopefully that's all good. So double click on that and we're going to add some code in. All right, so the code that we're going to do is this is the code we've done previously in a lesson, but if you haven't done that lesson or you've totally forgotten about it, what we do is we have the current index in those rows there. It's got information about each person who hasn't paid their bill. So I want to find out what row the cursor's suddenly clicked onto and is highlighted. And then once we've got that row, what we can do is we can take out that selected row. The first column is called a cell, and column 0 is where we've got the doctor name, okay? Remember, VB starts numbering at 0, not at 1, so column 1 is actually called cell 0, and you should be used to that sort of thing by now. So we can take that doctor name out, and we're just going to put it in our own variable called str doctor name, and str appointment date, str appointment time. So we're going to take each of those things out and put them into our own fields, which we're defining here. Why are we doing that? Because this is too long and complicated to keep coding into things, so it's going to be easy if we just have shorter variables to put it in when we're doing the code. And the first lot of code we're going to do is just a simple message box that we're just going to make sure it is actually an unpaid bill by checking if Boolean paid is false. And then we're just going to show the information which we extracted from that row, from all the cell columns, and we're just going to put that in a little message box there with what patient name we got, what doctor name, and so on, and put that out onto the screen. So let's test that and see how it works out. And when we do that, what happens is when we're clicked on this first appointment here for Tiana Bertrand, it's just going to take all that information out of each cell there for this particular row we're selected on, the selected item, and it's going to format it into that message. So the patient's Tiana, the doctor's Dr. Brainiac, that's the date, that's the time, that's the charge, and it has not been paid. All right, so that's proving that that's all working okay, that we're selecting our data out of that data row in the data grid view, and we're able to get that data into program variables, and then here they are and they're all working okay. So it's best to build these things up step by step. So we're not going to create a new form straight away and try and format all the email text and then try and plug all these values into the right place in the email. Do this step by step slowly and test as you go. Incremental development is the way to go. So we also check these other ones right down to Jenna Kardash, and that's all working. Her information's coming up correctly in the message box as well. And we also did some things because they could be just listing out the appointments for a doctor, and there could be people that have paid on that, and maybe they decide to click the unpaid email button for some reason. And what will happen there is, because we had that check to make sure it was paid false, if you try and click on someone who has paid their bill, we've got coding in there which will just tell you, no, Sharon Simmons here has paid this bill, so it's not going to list anything out for her because that is good, it's all been paid for. All right, so that's kind of the end of the version 1 code. And now we're going to get on to building version 2, where instead of just the data for the unpaid bill, we're actually going to kind of format it all in so that it could look like it was in an email to send to the person. So that work we just did, having the message box to show, you know, those data items which we selected, we're just going to delete all that because we're not going to use the message box anymore. So just go into the program there for the BTN unpaid email and keep that, but just delete all of this out. And we're replacing it with this. So if the Boolean paid is false, we're going to make one variable, str email contents, okay? And that's going to join together all of those data items plus some text here to build an email, all right? So str email contents, I think we've dimensioned that somewhere else, so we'll just show you that. Make sure up the top of the program that you've made that public. So up the top of the program, you define those main variables and your file names and whatever. We've got public str email contents as string. So that's a public variable. So str email contents, what it's going to be is we're going to have this heading here, which is just going to give the subject for the email. Then this ampersand VBCRLF. VB carriage return line feed, that just means jump down to the next line. So it's going to print out that line, jump down to the next line, and here we've just got some spaces for the next line, just so we're going to have some gaps. And then it's going to say hi, and we're going to join on that str patient name value. So if it's Tiana, it'll say, hi Tiana Byrne. Then we're going to jump a line, leave a space. We're going to tell them they've got an unpaid bill, and this line here, leave a blank line. Details are as followed, leave a blank line. The date, take out the date which we found and put into our variable, take out the time, the doctor and the charge, then just a blank line and please pay this bill, skip to the next line blank, and so on until we're finished. And then we'll just have a message box to show all of this str email content. So that's just one string variable. It's got all these lines of code and there's little space gaps between them, these lines of text which are going to show up, and we'll get a message box display of our email text. So here we go and we test it. So if we're on that first record there and we click the unpaid email button, what will happen is we will actually get all of our email text on there. So we've tested that with all of these lines in here for the unpaid bills, and that all worked fine. And again, if you try and do it on another function, like if listed doctor names or patient names and they've already paid and you try and click it, it'll just tell you they've paid the bill and it won't give this formatted email. Now with this formatted email in the message box, the thing about this is you can't go in there with your mouse and highlight this text to copy and paste it into an email. So this is all the hard work done. We've got the email displaying and it's all nicely formatted, but we now need to make a form, a pop-up form which comes up, and if we put all of this str email text into that form, you will be able to drag your mouse across it and copy and paste it out to an email application like Outlook, Hotmail or Gmail. So that's what we're doing next. So in version 3 we're making a pop-up form. So the first thing to do is to make that actual form. But before you do that, you might just want to take a break and do all that coding which we've just shown you. Test all that, make sure it's all working in message boxes before you get to this next part, because this next part will be a new thing and that'll take a little while as well. So like in the YouTube video index, there are sort of timeline indexes that show each section of the video. So if you do stop the video now, you can come back to it later and just use that index in the description to find out where you're up to and continue. All right, so what we're doing here is we need to add a new form onto our project. So here's our Solution Explorer, and there's the main project name there. So you just right click with your mouse on that and you do an add and new item. Now the new item you want to pick is you want to pick Windows Form is the item. So we pick that and we need to give it a name. Emailform.vb is going to be its name down here. And then we click on this add button and that will get us a form. And what we've done on that blank form is we've just made the background the same color as our original form. And we've named it email form and also set the text properties email form down in there. So that's why this says email form up here. So we didn't have a space in between it when we did that adding previously. It was just called email form. This is a rich text box. So that's just a rich text box. And so because of that, you call it an RTB. So this is RTB formatted email. We're just setting up the font there to size 11 with the standard sans serif normal font that VB uses most of the time. And we've also got a button down here, BTN close, so that when they're finished with this, they can just close this form and it will disappear. And I think the font size in that was just font size 10. So yeah, that's what we're setting up in that new form we're making, the email form. So we get that all set up. And then if we double click anywhere in the blank space on that email form, we need to add in this code, all right? So when it loads up, what we want to do is what's going to go in that RTB formatted email.txt in that rich text box we set up is we're just going to go over to form 1. So we're using this full name referencing form1.str email contents. So it's going to get all that formatted material which we were showing in the message box previously, and it's going to put it into that rich text box in this pop-up form. And that's all there is to it, and it'll all be there, and we will be able to copy and paste it. So we also need some coding for when we click that close button, and that's just going to be me.close, so that that form, the pop-up form, can just close down and disappear. Alrighty, so back in form 1, so that was code just there for the email form. You need to go back to form 1 because there, remember, we were doing the message box shows string email contents. We'll just comment that message box out, and instead we'll just go, all right, email form.show. It's time to show that pop-up box. And then it'll show the pop-up box, and as that pop-up box loads, it'll go to the load code and it'll go and grab str email text out of this form 1. So this is in the form 1 behind that one where we're changing what we had message box to just show the email form, and we'll test all that out and see how it goes. So we've got our unpaid bill here, the second one that happened at 14:30, 2:30 in the afternoon, and they've clicked the unpaid email on that, and this form opens up and it gives us our unpaid email text all correctly. So that's fantastic. It is 14:30 with Dr. Brainiac, and it is Tiana Bertrand. So that is really working nicely, and we now can take that text and copy and paste out elements of it and put it into an email application, and we can send the email off to the person. But hang on 1 minute there. We did test it for all these other ones and it worked okay. But if we're going to send it off to the person, we need a person's email address. So look, that's all working great. However, and remember, as you know, there's always a however, we don't actually have the patient's email address to use for sending the email. So oops, that's kind of a big problem. So when we look at that, we don't have anywhere on here where we can copy and paste the email address. So it's going to be a pain to go and look up their email address somewhere else and then type it in manually. So we should fix this up so that it's more automated and it's got the email address in there. So we're going to have a patient contact file and add that onto our system, and that needs patient name, email, and phone. And then we can read that file and search for Tiana Bertrand in it, and we can find her email address and we can include it in this formatted text for the email. So that's going to take a while, but that's what we're doing next. Now, Currently in that appointments file from that previous lesson, we've got all of these different patients here who had appointments with different doctors. Now, do we need to have all of them in the patient contact XML for what we're doing here? No, we don't. If we just have the two people we need, the unpaid bills people, Jenna Kardash and Tiana Bertrand, and we'll just include 3 other people as well, just to save a bit of time and a bit of processing on that file to make it. So, you know, if you're building the full system that is actually going to be prototyped and used, of course you'd have to have records for everyone. But this will be enough just to test that our little process to find the email address and add it onto here is going to work okay. So in Windows Notepad, we made this file, so we're calling it DS Patient Contacts for its main file name, and so I got the /DS Patient Contacts down the bottom, and each element in it is called dtab patient. All right, so we've got the patient name, their phone and their email all in there, and we've just got those people. Now it does have a namespace in it too, so it's got this temporary universal resource identifier, and it's dspatientcontacts.xsd is the name of it, okay? Now we're not actually going to make a bound form and add it in so that they could, you know, add patients in using a screen and save. They could delete, they could edit and modify and resave. You could do all that, and that's why we have this namespace in here to allow that to be done later on. If you don't use a namespace type file, later on it's going to be harder to make one that's bound, because after you've done that, this code won't work because it didn't have the name in it, and you have to do all these rejigs and rechanges as we saw in a previous lesson. So we just put that kind of thing in there, and it's always http temp URL, then / and the name of what your file is here with a .xsd on the end. So I made that in Notepad and saved it. If you want to get the downloads for this lesson by clicking the link in the video, you can actually get that file ready-made just to save you a bit of time and typing. All right, so we're into our next version of the program now, where we're going to actually try and find the email address for someone so we can add it onto that email text. So up the top, we need to import system.xml, make sure we've got that in there. That's going to be important, and that goes above public class. And then we're going to have to set up some dimensioning there so that VB knows what the name of our file is. So our file's called patientcontact.xml. We've saved it in Notepad as that name with the .xml on the end, not .txt, and it's called patient's XML file. Then we're going to define an XML doc so that VB can just read that file all at once, grab the whole lot and put it into an XML doc in memory, and then that's in memory and we can search through the XML doc when we need to do things. So we're going to need a public variable for when we find an email address. So we're just setting that up here, public str found email address as string, and that's just going to be, the found email address is going to be nothing at the moment. And we're also going to have some other code, but that's the main code you need at the start of the program, and underneath is where the old appointments file was defined, and it had an XML doc as well, I think, and things like that. But this needs to go up the top of the program, these 3 things, and that'll be that done. Now if we double click anywhere on the empty part of the form to go into the form load subroutine, now we're on form 1 for this, not on the email form, so we're on the main form 1 when we do this. And so we go into the form 1 load, and what we do is we're going to check that the patient's XML file exists. So it needs to have been copied over to the bin debug folder of your project, because if it's not copied in there, then this will find that out and give a warning message. So this is just a standard checking whether a file's there or not. And if it isn't there, you just say it's not found and there's a file read error. Okay, so make sure you've remembered to have that patient contact .xml file over in your bin debug folder for your project, and then that will all be good. Now we're going to use a function to search for the patient email. So we're going to do just a quick review of functions here, and if this doesn't make any sense at all, then you're probably going to have to go back and watch our previous lesson all about functions and how you set up functions. Functions are really handy when you need to do something several times. So every unpaid email we format, we're going to go and search that patient's XML doc in memory to find out their email. So we might as well put that in a function. Anyway, this isn't the function yet. This is a different function. This is one for calculating GST, goods and services tax, which is kind of like VAT and like state sales tax in the USA. It's just an extra tax that goes on, and it's 0.1 or 10% here in Australia. But we're going to have a DBL, a double variable here, because we're calculating a number. And calculate GST is the name of the function, and what you're passing in is what the wholesale price was, and then this function will work out 10% of that and work out the GST and pass it back. So this is in your main program, in your subroutine, where you call that function. So this name of the function here, calculate GST, when you actually go down the bottom of the program and write all the function code, you just need to remember that that name has to be exactly the same. So that's to say calculate GST here, and down here it has to be calculate GST, it has to be calculate GST there. So the name of this is really important, and the name must stay the same through all of those parts of the function. And what we're passing in does not stay the same. So this is the DBL wholesale price we've currently got up in the program processing we've been doing. For the function, it's just going to be the input price that's coming into the function. So here we just say on the function part, by the value, and it's DBL input price. We're getting an input price. It's a double as its type. And the calculate GST, because we need the answer as a double, at the far side here you write as double, which is a bit confusing. So this calculate GST is going to be a double type variable for numbers, and we're passing in a double type variable as well, and we're putting that into DBL input price. Then it can do its little calculation here, put the answer for that calculation into calculate GST, which is the name of the function, and return that back up to the main level. So the value will get returned in here, and then DBL GST will become that value, all right? So look, it's a little bit complicated the first few times you do it, and this actual public function, end function, is a lot like kind of a subroutine, but that goes right down the bottom of your program. That's where we usually put the function. So that was a bit of a review of functions, and now let's make the one which we need to make for this program. So the first code we add goes into form 1 at that BTN unpaid email subroutine. Remember, we had all this stuff where we could get all our variables out of the rows there and see what they were. And then here is where we're going to actually have another variable called the found email address, and we're going to do that by a function. So this is all the new code we're adding into that section, straight underneath where we were defining our variables and picking them out from the data grid view on the form. And this is the function part. So we're going to call this function called find patient email, and we're going to pass it the patient name. So whatever str patient name was that we pulled off that data grid, that's going to get passed into the function. All right, then when it comes back after it's done that function, if the patient has a blank email address, okay, that means we didn't find anything. So patient named, and put their patient name there in a message. They've got no email address, so you're going to have to do that one manually, and they'll have to go find them and phone them up and do it that way, or send them a text message. Okay, so that'll have to be manually done. And then we need a little bit more code that we're adding in as well straight under that, because there could be multiple patients with the exact same name. So our function's going to figure that out, and if there are, it'll pass back for the found email address this message, ** duplicate names error **. So if we've got that message back from the function, we know it must have found a couple of people, or 2 or 3 people that all had the same name. So again, we can't reliably find the email address for them. So that one's going to have to be followed up manually by phone as well, because there are duplicate patients. But if neither of those errors happened after we've done the function, well, then it's going to be all good. And what we can do is, down in the, when we're stringing together the email contents now, we can include a new part here. So we just put this code in, insert this code and add it in, that the email address, and put what the found email address was, and then just have a blank line. So it's now going to list out the person's email address as well, because we've been into the patient contact XML file and we found it. Now all that magic happened in the function, so now we have to look at the code for the function. All right, so coding for the search function. This is a file that we're searching right here, this patient contact file. Now it does have this namespace. So from previous lessons, or if you haven't done previous lessons, or if you've forgotten what you did, here it is. So this name here, this temporary universal resource indicator name, this one up here, rather than have to deal with that really long name, what you can do is if you go to the file, which is now in the XML doc, okay, so I've read it in and put it in that XML document. So we can just go to there and get the namespace URI out of it. So we've got it in memory in an XML doc. This is just saying go in there and grab this thing here, the bit that's in red on that display. And then we need a namespace manager. So we're just dimensioning manager number 1, and that's a namespace manager. And it's going to be for this XML document we've got for the patients. All right, and we need to add the namespace in, and we're just going to call it NS1, and that has to do with the namespace for the universal resource indicator of the patients, which is this red thing here. And now we can create a node list, and we can search through the node list to match up the name and then grab the email from the matched name. All right, so this is where we're setting up a node list, and we're just going to that doc, and we're selecting for that doc all of these node values: pat name, pat phone, pat email, pat name, pat phone, pat email. All these things here, we're selecting them out of there using a node list as our mechanism. And because it's a namespace, we have to have this coding in here to tell it that you go down through DS patient contacts and you go down into each DTab patient, and inside each DTab patient is where you're grabbing the nodes to list out and search. So here's where we have our search routine. So for every patient in there, so for each of these 5 records we've got here, it's going to go through, and on the pat name field, which is this one here where it's got the person's name, the inner text means grab this stuff which is in black. Don't use the XML tags at all, just grab the inner text in between those tags, which is like Tiana Bertrand, Barry Johnson, Jenna Kardash, and check out whether that inner text matches the input patient name, okay? So the patient name which we're working on at the moment, does what we've got here match up with them, okay? And if it does, then we take the email address from here, this one, all right, the inner text, and we put that in our str found email address, which we can pass back up to the main subroutine. And we also count how many matches we've found. This is where we're checking to make sure there aren't sort of 2 or maybe even 3 people all with the same name, okay? So we're doing that as well in that search loop. And this is just where we were commenting in some lines of code just to check things quickly. If the number of matches was 2, if it found duplicates, would the warning message come up? So if it does find duplicates, if the number of matches is greater than 1, then in the email address, we're going to pass back that duplicate names error, which we saw the subroutine looks at and spits out an exception message and tells them they're going to have to do that one by phone instead. And otherwise, the find patient email that we were trying to get by this function is just going to be the found email address which we found from the search. So we're just going to put that in there, and that can get passed back up to the main subroutine. Standard kind of function processing here, that this part and this part have to be the exact same name as the function name. So having got through all of that, we're now ready to go and do some testing. So if we're on Tiana Bertrand and we click our unpaid email, look at this. We've now got the email address for Tiana, so we can send the email. So we've got that extra, the missing link, the missing piece of information is there. So that's great. It's it's had a look at the XML doc copy of that patient's file, the patient contact file. It's found tibbet@gmail.com and it's put it here. So that's going to work out great. We can now email Tiana and tell her she owes money. And the same with Jenna Kardash. It's found her one and put the right email address there from the file from Jenna Kardash. And that's all good. So now she could have her bill pay reminder message sent out as well. So that's working great. And what we need to do now is test those exception messages. Because you might have like a really old person who's a patient of the surgery and they don't have internet or email or anything like that. So my mum's like that. She hates computers, even though I love them and do them all the time and tell her, Mum, you should, do computer stuff and do all this. She says, no, I don't want to do any computer stuff. So that's all right. And she won't have an email address, all right? She would always have to be contacted by phone. So this can happen. And we can have two people with the same name. So we're going to edit our file here. And what we've done is for Tiana Bertrand, now this is the display in Microsoft Edge. You would have to go into, obviously, Windows Notepad or Notepad++ to do the actual editing. But what we did was we just deleted out her email. So now she does not have any email in there, Tiana Bertrand. And what we did with Jenna Kardash is we just copied her information and pasted it down here. So there's actually two Jenna Kardashians and they have different phone numbers and they have different email addresses, okay? So that's going to be a problem. Duplicate patient names, we won't be able to get a reliable email address because we don't know which Jenna Kardash is which. And so we need to put out an exception message for that one that'll have to be followed up by phone. So when she doesn't have an email, we expect the processing the exception message about you've got to do it by phone. When we've got those two Jenna Kardashians again, we expect an exception message. So if we run it now with that new updated file for Tiana, when you click unpaid email, it's not going to format the email. It's going to say instead that Tiana Bertrand has no email address, so unpaid account's going to have to get followed up by phone. And when we do the same sort of thing there for Jenna Kardash, because there's two of them, what's going to happen is when it does the search, it'll count that there were two people, so we can't reliably work out which email address it is. So we put up this message, more than one patient named Jenna Kardash was found. The unpaid account will have to be followed up by phone instead, okay? So that's all that done. Now, there is a big design issue here that we didn't set up a unique field or key for the patients in the system when we did the previous lesson. So this has sort of come up now when we've tried to find an email address. We've sort of thought, ooh, hang on, what if there's more than one people with the same name? Then we've got a problem, okay? So even though we have a problem, I mean, how likely is it really that both of the people with the same name are both going to be bad at paying bills and are going to be on the unpaid bills list? Well, maybe it isn't really likely, so maybe it isn't a huge problem, but it is kind of inconvenient for people to have to follow it up by phone and they can't just email everyone. So look, the easiest fix for coping with duplicate patient names would be to use their phone number as a unique identifier. So look, we could add a patient number as a primary key, and we've shown you how to do that in previous lessons, I think, when we had the tennis players and gave them each their own unique number. But what they're doing in a lot of systems these days is, because most people have mobile phones, if you take a person's name and their mobile phone number, that can be a unique identifier, okay, because it's very unlikely that you're going to have two people with the same name and the same mobile phone number. So nowadays for primary keys, people are just including the phone number to use as a primary key. It doesn't have to be a mobile phone, it can be their home phone as well. It's not likely to have two people using the same phone name, a home phone that have the same name. All right, so the best way we could have fixed that up is that when we had that appointment data, in the data grid rows, and we were listing appointments, as well as kind of the doctor, the time, the patient, all of that, we should have also included the patient's email, phone number there as well. Because then when we did our search, what we could do is we could have a person's name and their phone number coming off that appointment, and then we'd be able to make a definite unique match in the patient contact file, and we could reliably get the right email address for the right person. So that would get rid of that problem with duplicate names or triplicate names or whatever. So you need to kind of think when you're designing things of all the kind of things that can happen, the exceptions, which we didn't do. In that doctor appointment thing, we're just putting something together quickly just to show you how to do search, filter, and sort. And we didn't really worry about doing a primary key. We kind of knew we should have, but we didn't bother because we just wanted to get that lesson out. But you can see further down the track when you're building a system, you can run into problems. So we now need to go back and kind of change that appointments XML file, add an extra field in, have the patient's phone number, do quite a bit of tweaking. And that's not so much of an issue because it doesn't take long to update code and update XML files with Windows Notepad. But what does take the time and what is really a bad thing when you're doing software development is all of the time retesting it to make sure everything still works properly, okay? That's the killer, doing all the retesting. So yeah, if you don't get a design right, look, it can be fixed up and retested, but it takes so much time. And when you're developing software, time is something you do not have enough of, because there'll always be things that go wrong and need fixing. So nothing ever runs perfectly and to time, like this video, because I'm talking too much, so I'll stop doing that. So remember, always dig deep at the design stage and consider all of the possibilities. That's the lesson learned from this experience. All right, so on our programming course, we've got all of the other lessons, including that doctor appointments lesson. So if you haven't done that lesson and didn't have the thing built, you can go to our programming page and just click on programming, and it'll have the list of lessons, and you can find that lesson and do it, or get the downloads for it. So look, thanks for watching. We hope you've enjoyed this lesson. Now, this whole pop-up form thing can be used if you want to present this email text, but if you want to make a summary report of something and just have the report show up so that people could copy and paste that and print it, or if you've got, you want help text. So if you had, like, on your nav bar, the little question mark thing, when people click on that, you could have a pop-up form come up, which could just even be a picture box of some Word document manual you've made or something like that. So you could have like this help information in a pop-up box that they could just look at and then close while they're doing a function in your system. All right, so it could be useful for so many things. Just the idea of getting data from another form or from the program behind the form, and then having a pop-up form which shows either summary information, a report, or some help information for the user. So that's it. If you like this video, give it the big thumbs up, because that'll be useful. And also subscribe to our channel so you find out when we're putting out the new videos, which is, you know, we're trying to do that every week. It's definitely every 2 weeks that they come out. And, you know, enjoy programming with VisualBasic.net.